You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
Welcome back to the Back Home Network Emergency Podcast Series. I feel like we've been doing a lot of these this summer, gentlemen, and that's a good thing.
Yeah,
we need as many emergency podcasts as possible, especially with IU men's basketball. We could use some klaxons and some alarm bells going off all over the place as we find that IU has now landed their first recruit for the 2026 class. Prince Alexander-Moody announcing about 3 hours ago that he is committed to Indiana men's basketball. We're going to talk about it. We've got Mike Weemuth and Bob Moats from X's and Joe's. I'm Galen Clavio from Crimson Cast, amongst other shows on the platform. And we are happy to have you folks joining us here on a Friday night, 8:40 p.m. And guys, this was one of those that we'd kind of heard. It was one of two commitments that Indiana could potentially have landed. They were in the final four, but they land this one. And you both have had a chance to see Prince Alexander-Moody a little bit and do some scouting on him. So we wanted to get your thoughts on things. First of all, just a quick reminder to everybody, we are brought to you by Home Field Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, and a whole summer series of shirts, mystery tees coming out, college football just around the corner, but of course a huge amount of college basketball apparel available. Go to homefieldapparel.com, use the code HOME23, get 15% off your first order. And also just a little housekeeping note, if you subscribe to the Back Home Network on YouTube, you would have gotten an automatic notification when we went live for this show. If you'd like that in the future, if you're listening to this afterwards, just go to YouTube, type in Back Home Network, mash the subscribe button, join the nearly 8,000 IU fans that have joined us there on YouTube. All right, gents, we got the front matter out of the way. Let's dive into chapter one. A recruit that is coming out of the DMV, so Kenny Johnson's fingerprints all over it. This is why you bring a guy like Kenny Johnson on staff. And we'll dive into that a little bit here later, but let's focus on the player. Prince Alexander-Moody, 6'4", four-star shooting guard, chooses Indiana over a variety of power conference schools, Michigan State, Georgetown, Virginia Tech, Oklahoma State, Mississippi State, among others. Mike, let me start with you, I guess, a little bit. Give us an overview of who Prince Alexander-Moody is, what his game is like, so on and so forth.
Sure. I guess the quick and dirty sort of rundown on him. He's a fast-rising shooter attacker, playing for the number one AAU team in the country right now. Team Takeover is the number one team ranked in the EYBL at this stage. He also plays for Bishop McNamara for high school, and McNamara plays in the Washington Catholic Athletic Conference, which is like one of the most elite conferences in the country, especially on the East Coast. That's where you see like DeMatha, Bishop O'Connell, St. Paul VI, Archbishop Carroll, just like a lot of the elite like magnet schools that you see like in the DMV area. To describe him a little bit more specifically, yeah, I would say his shooting is definitely the part that's starting to make his stock rise. If you looked at his stats, let's say like a year or two ago, he was a shooter in terms of making attempts. He just was not that great at making them. You see a lot of his stat lines where he would go like 1 for 7 one night and 2 for 8 the next, and maybe occasionally get like a 3 for 6 or a 4 for 8, but he was pretty safely like in the low 30s in terms of his numbers. Now you've seen lately, he's definitely starting to rise in terms of his just his efficiency. I mean, he's still shooting about like 7, 8 threes a game, but now he's like more consistently making 4 or 5 a game. And also his free throw percentage is also kind of like spiked up. I think he's like safely above 80% now. So like when you're doing scouting on players in terms of their shooting and how it like transitions into college, you definitely see a correlation of those kids that can shoot like 38% and above from 3 with some volume, and also like safe 80% and above. Those are the kids that you definitely feel pretty confident that you're going to be able to transition to college and be able to be like pretty efficient shooters from deep. So that's the shooting part. Good defender. He's got great length. I've not seen his actual wingspan. They haven't published that on him yet. But just eyeballing him, he looks like he's a decent +4 or 5 at least in terms of his wingspan. And I also say his handle is definitely. I know they list him as a point guard. Bob and I have kind of talked about this. I don't think he's like a natural point guard. I think he can be. Maybe he develops a little bit better as time goes on. I think he's definitely let's say a backup point guard, but more like a guy you put off the ball and can do some like secondary ball handling. But I definitely see him being a really effective guy. You swing the ball to, either takes a quick shot or just attacks the closeout. The kind of guy that Bob and I have been begging you to recruit more of over the last and several years.
Kind of the Aaron Nesmith, Andrew Nemhard model of guard, the way the Pacers use them. I'm guessing
exactly. And I will make my one use of my one Baylor reference per week right now. But yes, the Baylor 2021 kind of guards you saw, he definitely kind of fits into that model. So
yeah. Bob, what else we got on Prince Alexander-Moody and this recruitment? Are you surprised that he ends up landing here, as he was offered by Maryland, which is in his backyard? Illinois was in on him as well. We mentioned Michigan State and Georgetown. This is the type of player that IU once recruited and got, and then didn't for a long time, and seems to now be going after in earnest again. And here's their first success with it.
I think first off, looking at this from how it fits into an overall picture of recruiting, we're looking at a kid that's coming from the East Coast, the DMV, again, one of the main hot spots. And Mike will be the first one to tell you kind of, as you kind of go along this corridor, it's that easternmost point where you want to be very involved and you want to make sure you're there, which is going back to the Kenny Johnson kit. You look at the programs that were recruiting him, that IU was going up against. This is the sort of player that IU has been needing to get and has not really gotten in the bulk that they've needed to over the last really 2 decades. It explains why you have certain why you have power forwards playing your 3 spot, for lack of a better term. Now that you have him, Prince Alexander-Moody, he fits a profile that we're seeing with Darren DeVries as well. What we're seeing with him is he's getting a couple leads, getting a couple bigs, but he's really filling that middle with 6'4" to 6'8" guys who can shoot the ball and drive the ball. As Mike said, and I was watching it, but the film I watched on him, he's being at his high school program is being used as a point guard. For team takeover, he's more that off guard kind of small wing position. He's not, and this is not a knock. This is a knock on not really a knock on a player. It's just kind of where you are developmentally. So many times, players at this stage of their development, they've been asked to score their whole lives. And what they're looking to do coming off a screen or when they get the ball is immediately look to score. And the good thing about Moody is that he hits, when he hits the lane, he's landing in 2 feet. He is looking for his shot. Going and elevating to the college game, once he attacks those closeouts, he's going to see and learn better how to deliver the pass in the right location to the right spot off the read. He reads well enough to attack the closeout at the right time currently, which is a good sign. He makes the right decision there. He can also get his own shot on the perimeter. We're talking about that with the last recruit, the kid from Serbia that we just talked about. Very similar, where he can kind of get his own shot in those areas and kind of figure out when to do that. But I think from that standpoint, this is again the sort of player that you need an entire roster of. 8 or 9 players like this to fill in with a couple points and a couple bigs, and you've got yourself a roster that can compete at a high level.
Yeah. Mike, it's an interesting thing as I've looked at his rankings and where he sits. There's a real delta in terms of how the recruiting services have looked at him. I mean, I've seen him as low as 170th in one set as a 3-star. He's 104th, I think, with Rivals as a 4-star. Like, is there a good explanation for that variance in terms of how he's being scouted, especially when you consider the programs that had offers in for him? Like, it's clearly a guy that a lot of really good programs are trying to get. But it is interesting, and maybe you have an explanation on this, why there's not quite the same level of consistent evaluation from the scouting services.
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole pod on that alone. But
don't we have a whole show that does this?
Yeah,
you guys haven't heard. There's a show called X's and Joe's Secrets to Unlocking what's the tagline, Bob?
Decoding the winning formula in college basketball. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you trust those guys, I mean, be careful.
I wouldn't.
Yeah. No. So yeah, you'll get variances between the services just because some of it is just timing, because the updates come at different times, and so a kid pops up a little bit. The service that does the most recent update is going to have a higher ranking for the kid, versus the one that's still lagging. Also, you have to kind of consider that he plays with some really good talent around him. On his high school team, Caden Samuels is the wing forward at McNamara. He is probably maybe the second or third most skilled wing in the whole class. He's like a top 20 recruit for 2026. And Samuels is also on Team Takeover, along with Jordan Smith, who is another recruit you may be hearing about up in the future for IU, and hopefully a lot. Jordan Smith's probably the most exciting guard in college or high school basketball this year. I don't want to do a scouting report, but just easy for IU fans to kind of envision. He's like Eric Gordon with dreadlocks. I mean, the kid is just built, explosive, literally chin on rim kind of elevation, and just, skilled, but very aggressive. He's going to be a great player. I mean, and so he's playing with those kids already. All right. So there's always going to be some variance in terms of the ratings, in terms of when you're playing with kids that are that, just surrounded with talent. It's like, okay, is this kid this good because he is the third option on this team, versus is he, or is he really contributing what we think we could if you took those good players away from him? So there's a variety of reasons where you're going to get some ranking variance. I will say this personally, just, doing my own basic rankings. If I were categorizing him just based upon, what his scout is, from what I see, he kind of aligns with about a 70 to 90 kid.
Which was where he was about a year ago. Right. And Mike mentioned the shooting issues that he was having. And sometimes, kids, when they're growing, I mean, kids, they're sometimes their shot changes, their body changes, they put on more weight, they put on more muscle. They're maturing. And so sometimes you see a little bit of a lull in their shooting where, okay, they were maybe hitting at a better clip when they were 13 or 14 and 15. And when they're 15, 16, 17, they kind of go through a process where they're kind of reforming, or their body's kind of rebuilding a little bit. The other part of this, and this is, I think, the kind of the critical thing is, and this is something Mike and I do talk about a little bit. I've always felt like, the recruiting industry and the way they rank has just now begun to start valuing shot creation and shot making as a key skill. Because when you would go back to the rankings, I would go over the last, maybe 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, you saw a lot of talking about handle, talking about court vision, talking about pass delivery, talking about getting to the rim, that sort of blow by speed. Or they would talk about bigs and their ability to playing up over the rim, and their ability to, just be athletically more gifted, or skills wise, those were the skills that were prioritized. And what we're finding now is a lot of players I felt were undervalued, who were considered to be shot creators and shot makers. And you're beginning to see the rankings try to catch up with that. Well, part of the problem with that is now when you look at a world where you have leads, bigs, everybody else, and now you're trying to figure out how to evaluate everybody else, there's going to be some disagreement. There's going to be some churn, trying to just say, well, is this kid Is this kid projecting to be a 38% three-point shooter in college basketball
Right.
at Division I? Or is he a 32%, 30% three-point shooter? If I'm looking at a player that this kid reminds me of, like how he could be utilized, think Jemiah Neal, who played at Creighton this past year. And he was a sub 30% three-point shooter in his time at Arizona State. 6'5", wing player, could get his own shot. He got better at making assists his senior year, especially in the Creighton system. And then he got his three-point shot over 30%. I feel like this kid is very similar to Neal, except I think he's a better shooter from the perimeter and definitely from the line.
Yeah.
And again, it's kind of both from let me start with the recruiting archetypes. It does feel like there was kind of a referendum against combo guards in the eyes of the recruiting services for a while and not knowing how to deal with them. And now we're seeing the way that basketball has kind of evolved over the last 10 years or so. This is becoming an archetype that you want on your team, as you guys have mentioned. And clearly the archetype that Darren DeVries is looking for, as you mentioned, Mike, a bunch of guys who are switchable defensively, who can do multiple things offensively, who can be on ball or off ball. Yeah, you hope the shooting translates. I've seen some people bring up like the EYBL numbers are not as good as the high school numbers are, but I think is important to remember, you're talking about different roles being played as you go up in the collective level of talent that you're playing with, which is something that you're likely going to see for most college players coming off their high school teams or their AAU teams, where suddenly they're playing with a bunch of players who are significantly better than the players they were playing with, and maybe significantly better than they are, at least to start with. But it does kind of feel like a developmental piece. And we've heard a lot of people talk about and I don't mean developmental in terms of like going to need 2 or 3 years to get going, but a guy who can grow and stick around for a while if he sees a place for himself within the program and the ability to grow his game. And as we've seen, you can't just live in the transfer portal. You're going to need to have guys who can stick around for a few years. And especially with the way that DeVries set up the roster this year, you're going to need that handoff next year of guys who can learn the system, get it underway, and then be a sustainable force as the roster continues to coalesce and hopefully add some players that may only be here for a season.
Yeah, I think the idea of grabbing kids that are actually showing that they're improving in the moment is really key, because you see so often, and then unfortunately IU's been bitten by this in the past, where they'll get a kid that maybe had good credentials, let's say their junior year in high school, but maybe kind of just like leveled off in their senior year. But they were still kind of being viewed as, oh, wait a minute, but he was a top 50 kid when he was, a junior. Mm-hmm. But of course, some of those kids, because they plateau out, then they suddenly become more like a 150 kind of kid. You see, Moody's one of these kids that is definitely like spiking up. He's, again, his skill set, again, not just his shooting. I mean, his ability to create lateral separation. Mm-hmm. He's kind of developed even better left hand than he's had before. So, a lot of these facets of his game that you kind of see that you need to have when you're going to, upper tier college basketball. He's starting to develop those, and is going in the right direction versus them just plateauing out. Kind of the same with, with DeVries going after Sammy Jackson, even though IU lost him to VCU. He's another kid that was, on the rise. So I think it's interesting that it seems, at least looking at a lot of the offers that DeVries has made so far, a good chunk of those kids are definitely ones that were on the rise. They're not the kids necessarily that started at, let's say, 4 or 5 and have just kind of been fluctuating, in the top 20. He seems to be grabbing kids that have been actually showing some degree of improvement, which is, again, something that's pretty predictive of what kids do when they get in college.
And something I think he's going to have to do in this cycle, because as we saw in football, you're starting this cycle relatively fresh. Your staff is fresh. Mm-hmm. You've yet to play a game at Indiana or coach a game at Indiana. You're not going to probably nab a whole lot of recruits for that 26 class that are already recognized as being among the top players, at least not initially, unless you can get a cluster of players that really excite those guys. Now you're kind of cooking with gas in terms of what you can do with who you can sign and who might be interested in you. But I would imagine as they continue to forge relationships and forge a reputation among high schoolers who are currently freshmen, sophomores, you're going to see more higher level offers of guys that you've seen on this developmental curve, but maybe are already like clearly showing even higher levels of potential moving forward. Bob, we were talking a little bit before about, Kenny Johnson and this DMV circuit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is an important thing to bring back up, as IU really specifically went after a couple of assistant coaches who had strong recruiting pedigrees, but Kenny Johnson's a special case, and we've benefited from some of Kenny Johnson's expertise in the past. But explain to the folks like what makes him in this particular area such an important piece to have on Indiana's bench.
He has relationships with everybody in that area, and has been a fixture in this scene for, Mike, what do you say, 25 years?
Yeah, even longer if you go back. How long he's been involved in?
If we're really going back here, we're talking late 20th century sorts of things, where sort of building here. And I think a lot of that is, I believe he was Vic Oladipo. When you get to it, right to it, that IU lands Vic Oladipo, because, and very similar, kind of similar as what we were talking about, where you have a kid that projects to be, Vic Oladipo was not exactly ranked really high, but they saw unlimited ceiling with the kid, and he showed that as a college player, and also showed it as an NBA player as well. That that was a sort of player. And when you have those types of connections, when you have the sort of information that and the sort of experience that Kenny Johnson brings to the table, what you're able to figure out is, okay, we know that this kid right now hasn't developed this, but we're seeing that he is developing it right at this point. We've seen that, I trust this coach to make this evaluation. I trust these individuals who've seen him to make these evaluations. I've seen him myself. I see this kid as a definite high level target for us. That's the sort of thing you get out of the Rolodex. It's not just going into 24/7 or On3 and ESPN and going, okay, well, we've triangulated these, and these are the 15 kids based on the rankings and the positioning and that we need. What you're able to do then is you're able to kind of, again, it's like getting in on a stock right before they announce getting on a pharmaceutical stock where they announce they have the latest diabetes drug.
Right.
If you know that, you're getting definite inside information, and that's what you're buying with an assistant coach when you're paying them what you're paying them. You're paying for that experience and that sort of background that you're not going to get just from maybe somebody that's kind of, hi, I'm Skippy. I'm here on my first year. I'd like to know how do you all play basketball in Baltimore? That's different than how we do it in Peoria, Illinois. It's like, now you get a guy that actually has that street cred, and it's fine. That's the business. And now that we're kind of going, now that the transfer portal market is settling, and we're beginning to start seeing, okay, how do you rebuild your feeders? Or how do you go back into your feeders? Having guys that know that are able to do both, and Kenny Johnson's one of them, it's pretty critical. Yeah.
It helps also that the programs that you're dealing with are some of the most elite in the country. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're talking about Coach Johnson obviously mentioning that takeover is number one on the EYBL circuit. Don't forget that Coach Clark has a long history with MoCon. MoCon's about probably the fifth best AU squad in the country right now. So, and when you're a first year coach, and you're probably not going to be able to have the advantage of like the longevity of relationships with recruits, because you're going to be losing out to guys who've been on them since they were freshmen. So what you have to rely on is the fact that, okay, I've got assistants that can basically kind of move us towards the front of the line. Not as like guarantee commits, but it definitely helps a lot in terms of your conversion rate on those kind of kids.
And what we heard, what we know about Darren DeVries is he's very much hands-on at closing these. Yeah. And that I think has been critical as we watch the whole portal unfold and we're watching these recruitments. We're seeing a coordination and activity from the whole staff. Remember, the assistant coach gets you in the door, the head coach has to seal the deal. And sometimes the assistant coach helps you do that too. But for the most part, there needs to be that relationship with the head coach. And I think he's showing how that he's not only interested in doing it, but he relishes doing it.
Yeah. Not a huge amount else to cover with this particular commit. I mean, all the stats in the video, I would recommend checking out. A lot of good tweets out there right now, and some message board and website coverage regarding Prince Alexander-Moody. I guess maybe we'll wrap up with this, gentlemen. The roster looks like it's almost complete for this upcoming year with Ristich, and we're still waiting to see what happens with that last piece of the roster. This, the first confirmed piece for 26. How many more recruits would you anticipate they're going to try to bring in this cycle? I mean, I know it's kind of tough to say because obviously you're going to have portal options. You're going to have guys that maybe initially you're thinking you're only going to stick around for a year and maybe we'll stick around for a second year. You'll have guys that'll transfer. The roster's still a little bit unsettled for 26. Do you have a sweet spot, patent pending, Mike, that you would like to see IU aim for in terms of the class size that they would have for 26?
Well, I think a lot of that's probably, just functionally, it's going to depend upon like how many of the kids they really want that they can get, right? And the rest is just going to be, okay. Well, let's say I know they're going to be going after heavy for Anthony Thompson. Not the Anthony Thompson of football that you remember, but an actual basketball recruit out of Ohio who's a fantastic talent that I know IU's like going after pretty hard. Latrell Almond also is a kid I know that seems DeVries is kind of focusing on. So there's going to be a core of probably like a certain, let's say like 5 or 7 kids at least that they're really going to like try to get some leverage with. If they get 3 or 4 of those, I mean, that'd be awesome. I don't anticipate they're going to be getting that many high school kids, but you never know. But is there a sweet spot? The problem is that right now in the data research I do, it's too new to know exactly like what the ratios are, right? We've only had like 2 full seasons or so of like having like a full cycles of recruiting classes going through at the same time as having the portal active. Just from my perspective, I think you need to have at least like a few high school kids, not necessarily like a full like 7, 8 in the past. You need to have at least a core of like 3 to 5. They're kind of hanging around in the program that can actually make a difference. So I think Moody is kind of one of those kids. Sisley, I think, is also a pretty good upper tier kid. That's probably going to make some waves once he develops a little bit more. If you can just get like 2 or 3 more kids like that, just kind of like cycle them through because you're going to lose some of them. I mean, there's no way you're going to retain all of them. The portal's going to chew you up on some of that. So, but I think if you can keep like 3 to 5 high school kids that are kind of active with you at all times, that is sort of like I would say maybe the most functional version of a sweet spot, I guess you have for that.
I'd say 4. I'm agreeing with Mike, and I would say that I feel I'm looking at this. I feel like they would need. They're looking at some. They have several bigs that they're looking at. Like I could see them going 5 if they want to take 2 big projects, because I think it's harder. It's much harder to find high level quality, ready to play big men in the portal than it is to find wings and even points and leads. I do think there may be a point where they're looking at a few lead guards. I think Jordan Smith was still on the list, right? That they have an offer out for. Yeah. That's going to be one of those Royal Rumble type recruitments where you better bring a chair and Miss Elizabeth if you're going to be competitive, and
a checkbook now,
and Ted DiBiase. We got to be the Ted DiBiase. We got to be the $1 million man in the ring with that one, But it's also, I think, that's something that you're looking at definitely getting. So you're going to need to replace Connerway with another lead. Ristic may come into that position. You're going to need some. You're going to need at least 2 to 3 leads in the roster going into next year or high quality. So I mean, 4 or 5 is probably about the number I would look at, and you could pick up the rest in the portal. But you're looking at kind of where DeVries is with this, with about 30 or so offers out. We also have to realize it's June 27th.
Right.
1 week from tonight is July 4th. So happy Independence Day. But now we're getting to the point where the fall visits for these seniors haven't really happened yet. Those are going to be coming. We're not really even chalk into what you would call heavy high school recruiting season going into that time from mid-August to the Thanksgiving break, where you start seeing visits followed by commitments. But no, I mean, I agree with Mike that I think it's really hard to tell, but I think at this point, if we come in, if we're sitting at Christmas and we have, 4 or 5 really good recruits that, and we're talking again, couple bigs, at least a lead and a couple wings, I think we should feel pretty good coming into this. And getting Moody at this point right now is a great start. It's a great start. I can't emphasize that enough. And
just to note, I think of the 4 players in this class that had made officials, this was one of them, and it was a couple of days ago. You mentioned Latrell Allman made an official on, I think, June 17th and 18th. Luigi Swigo, the Italian, made an official. So you still got a couple of those active out there, and then you've got this whole list, as Mike read off, who haven't really even set their officials yet for fall, and you were expecting those to kind of happen later on anyway, as far as the decisions are concerned. But good to get a fish into the boat always, and especially a 4-star, especially someone that could be a table setter for maybe some of his teammates on Team Takeover, and certainly reestablishing a recruiting relationship with the DMV. Good for business, regardless of where you're at in college football, college football, but definitely college basketball right now. So certainly a good day for IU basketball, good day for IU football recruiting too. We're going to try to talk about that this weekend. But guys, any final thoughts before we wrap up? Bob, you first.
Just more to watch, more to come. They're not close to being done yet.
Mike?
Yeah, same. And you have the summer circuit's kind of heating up. So like Peach Jam and things like that are just around the corner. So you're probably going to hear a lot of names, not just for this class, but for the next class. So recruiting never ends.
That's right. We had almost 1,500 people join us live on the various outlets, and we really appreciate it. Thanks to all of you for taking the time on your Friday night. If you watched us live, and if you're watching this later, hopefully you enjoyed it, as Prince Alexander-Moody, recruit from Maryland, commits to Indiana University. Darren DeVries' first high school commit and the first commit of the 2026 class. Thanks to Mike and Bob for joining us on the show tonight, and we will be back with more Back Home Network programming coming up soon. I will say, I noticed earlier on in the chat, Terry said that they did not get a notification when we went live. You do have to go in to your subscriber options for the channel and click on the full subscription option. That'll give you notifications, should pop up on your phone. Certainly will pop up on your YouTube, on your computer. So sorry about that, but if you're subscribed to YouTube, please try checking that out, see if it'll work for you notifications-wise. Anyway, for Mike, for Bob, I'm Galen Clavio. We're going to wrap up for tonight. Enjoy the weekend, folks. We'll catch you on the flip side, and so long, everybody.